Working. I was having some technical difficulties a minute ago. Alright, we may have some problems. Trying to fix it. Having some issues here. I'm trying to fix it, guys. Chill out. Calm down. I'm trying to fix it. Okay. That should have fixed it. Can y'all hear me now? Can y'all hear me better now? I need feedback, please. All right, y'all can hear me better now. Excellent, excellent. We were having some technical difficulties, but they seem to be working now. At least I think they are. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Raven's Roost, or Raven Reads, if you'd rather call it that. Based on the poll from last time, we're starting a new story tonight, Nomad. Nomad, which is a story that is actually pretty recent. I wrote this, I think, about a year or two ago with my buddy Jay. Many of you know him. This is a really unique story. It is a short story, and I have completed it. It was very neat. So basically how this story came about was my buddy Jay reached out to me, and he said, hey man, could you write a story for a picture I made? I said, sure. So he sent me this picture, and I really liked it. And he said, I don't have any idea what to do with this story or picture. I just call it Nomad. Could you do something with it? So I wrote a story for him. And Jay absolutely loved it. He thought it was so good. And so he comes to me about a month later, and he says, hey man, I drew another picture very similar to the one I sent you. Do you think you could write a sequel to what I created where we make this guy like a villain? And so I said, okay. So I did that. And we both thought, you know what, let's turn this into a series. Let's just carry the story of Nomad for as long as we can. And we had a great job. We had a great time just doing this. And it was incredibly fun. It was incredibly fun. And we were really sad to see it end, but all things must end. And so we will be reading the story together tonight. The sad thing is, Jay made different pictures for various villains and stories within the world of Nomad. So I look forward to showing some of those to you, perhaps at the end of the stream. But anyway, before we get started, of course, I want to reiterate the rules. The rules are simple. This is a reading stream. We do not talk games. We do not talk politics. We do not talk media in general. We're only here to talk stories. We're only here to talk about the stories being read. If you want to chat with me or ask questions in the chat, you are free to, but they cannot be about any of the aforementioned topics. We are taking a break from that tonight. And please be respectful to me and to everyone else in chat. That's about it. All right, so without further ado, I think it's time to get started with the very first chapter of Nomad, written back in 2019. So it is about 5 years old. Cool. All right, let's get started. The Nomad, Chapter 1. The world is a truly cruel place. None understand this better than the peasant folk of the small village of Bismut. The village is a fishing town. Their whole economy comes from the river their town is built next to. The town thrived for a time. However, times became far more difficult in the age of the shamans. It was a well-known fact that spirits roamed this world, powerful entities who silently observed the goings-on in the world without butting in. They blessed those who kept to the old ways, and they cursed those who brought destruction upon their sanctity. Humans were unable to communicate with these spirits, but shamans were different. The shamans were a group of extraordinary humans who had the ability to communicate with the spirits and even harness their power. There were those who claimed the shamans were spirits in human form. No one was sure, but what was sure was that while shamans were few in number, they had caused a great change in the world. Shamans tended to pop up in very upper class and wealthy towns and cities where their services could be paid for. Because of this, many businesses, families, and financiers began flocking to cities and towns with a shaman dwelling there to see their amazing feats. The criminals and bandits used these opportunities to strike at the now dying poor villages and towns without even enough to get by. And Bismut was a prime target. It didn't matter how many fish and crabs they pulled into their nets. By week's end, the profit made would mostly go to the local bandits and renegades. While they had done no real wrong, no citizen of Bismut had any love for the shamans. But all that changed one fateful day. He entered the town in the night, draped in a single hooded cloak. His body muscular and lithe, he hid his eyes under a messy mat of black hair, and some tattoos could be seen on his body. His hands were poorly bandaged with ratty cloth, and his pants were worn from travel. Some thought he was a bandit and avoided his eye, but he said nothing and took nothing from anyone. Instead, he simply looked to the local inn and wandered inside. The tenants stared at the stranger in disbelief and in confusion. It was odd enough to get traveling monks and vagabonds, but one of such strange appearance was especially bizarre. He did not carry the religious symbols of a monk, and he didn't have any weapons like a bandit might. He simply smiled as he sat at a table near the window. "Water, please," he whispered. He dropped a few silver coins on the wooden surface to pay, and the waitress nodded, leaving to get him a glass. No eyes left the strange wanderer. When the girl returned, he took the water and sipped it down like he hadn't had anything to drink in a long time. He beamed and held out another coin to her. "For your troubles." "Sir," she muttered, backing away, "I don't know who you are, but you really shouldn't wave money around here." "You may call me Nomad," the man replied. "And why ever should I not pay for deeds done for me?" "Sir, when the sun comes up, bandits will—" "I do not fear bandits, child," Nomad replied with a smirk. He slid the coin to her all the same. The girl took the coin and stared at the man in disbelief. This Nomad, a meager wanderer, scoffed at the idea of bandits and thieves. What sort of person was this? As the sun began its climb into the sky, the inn became frantic. Men and women began to evacuate swiftly to avoid the coming danger. The Nomad simply sat at his table, silently drinking his water and gazing out the window every now and then. The waitress girl hurried to him to warn him. "You should leave, sir." "I'm not done drinking," he answered. "But, sir, it's—" "I have nothing to fear." The Nomad smiled back. "Return to your work. I promise that no harm will come to you, myself, or this place." No sooner had he spoken than the door of the facility was thrown open, and in walked 4 men. They had scars and tattoos all over their bodies. The shorter one was quite fat and portly, having a round nose and beady eyes. A bandana hid his balding head, and he had his fingers stroking the blade of a cleaver. The 4th one was younger than the others, with stubble on his chin, an eye patch over one eye, and 2 swords strapped to his side. All had smiles on their faces as they fanned out, surrounding any of the remaining tenants at the inn.
"Good morning, Yosef," the shorter fat man laughed. "I hope business is good."
"We've gotten by," Yosef, the innkeeper, grumbled.
"That's excellent to hear. Just getting by is productive, I'd say. So how about you give us our share and we'll, let you get by," the fat man growled.
Yosef trembled slightly and pulled out a small pouch of coins, dropping them on the table. The short man nodded his head, and the younger thug approached, taking the bag and counting the money.
21 silver pieces, only 9 gold bits, the young man snapped.
"Yosef, I think you and I should discuss the phrase, getting by," the fat man snarled. That isn't enough to pay for a nightcap.
"It's all I've made this week. We haven't had any travelers come by lately," Yosef cried.
"Well, what about him?"
The fat man pointed to Nomad in the corner, who this whole time had observed the goings-on with mild interest.
"He's a traveler."
He only paid for water. I couldn't charge him extra," Yosef explained.
"Well, maybe we can. Torn," he snapped.
The tall, bald man smirked and walked towards Nomad, placing his giant hand on the table. "Can I help you?" the Nomad asked.
"Yeah, I ain't too good at counting. Why don't you take out your purse and count the money as you drop it in my hand?" Torn laughed.
"If money is what you desire, I suggest finding an occupation. Threats of violence aren't very effective at making honest wages," the Nomad answered. Angry at his snide remark, Torn struck the glass of water out of Nomad's hand, who stared at the shattered glass and spilled liquid. "And now you've made a mess. Are you proud of yourself?" he asked.
"You talk too much."
Torn raised his fist to pound the man's head into the dirt. The girl and Yosef turned away in fright, not wanting to see the man die. The Nomad raised his hand up, and with a slight touching of his palm, he brushed Torn's enormous fist aside and then struck him in the stomach. Torn grunted in pain and fell back, and Nomad climbed to his feet, pulling off his cloak. "I'll give you this one chance to put Yosef's money back on the table and walk away." The bandits chuckled to themselves, and the fat one just snapped. The one with the mane of wild hair pulled out a pair of throwing knives and hurled them at Nomad. The Nomad sighed and held up his hand, and with a mere mutter, he swung his hand as sweeping aside a veil, and the knives were cast aside by an invisible force.
What the? Torn!
The fat man cried. Torn lunged at Nomad, who glared up at him, and suddenly Nomad's eyes glowed brilliantly white. He raised his hand, and Torn froze, being lifted into the air by a strange power. Nomad then turned and flung the man into his comrade, knocking them both over as he inhaled. The tattoos on his body, like etchings, glowed brightly like his eyes. The air around him felt thick with a strange power, and as his cloak flew backwards, all could see that this man was no ordinary person.
A shaman! You're a shaman!
The fat man cried. "I am an instrument of the spirit," the man answered. "I ask you once more to leave this place." Before anyone could answer his offer, the young man drew both swords and attacked. Nomad saw him, and with barely a movement, he took a step back and evaded the downward slash. The boy attacked again, and Nomad ducked it. He wasn't even trying to retaliate. The boy, in his anger, began swinging wildly at him. Nomad just smiled, his eyes and etchings never losing their glow. "So young and so foolish," he whispered. "Skills and talent like yours shouldn't be wasted on such things as this." Finally, after his wild swing of the swords, Nomad threw up his arms and caught the wrist of the young man. He then thrust his open palm into the boy's chest. There was a loud sound like a clap of thunder, and the odd energy that surrounded Nomad seemed to swell up a moment, but as he withdrew his hand, there was a visible burn mark on the boy's tunic. The young man fell forward, his eyes glazed over as he fell into unconsciousness.
What the hell? The fat man cried. You shamans are just priests, right? Like speakers with the spirits and that nonsense. Why are you fighting us?
"I do not speak with spirits," Nomad corrected. "I am a servant of the Spirit, the One, the greatest of them all. I surrendered all to him, even my own name. It was his will that I come to this town, his desire that I save it. Make no mistake, sir, I did not come here to fight you. I came here to help them." He pointed to the innkeeper and the waitress. "My quarrel with you could have been avoided if only you'd left when I asked you to." The chubby man trembled with anger and then looked to the mane-haired thug. "Get the blunderbuss!" The tall man nodded and ran off out of the inn to grab something, and when he returned he was holding what looked like a small bronze cannon in his hand.
"You like it, you freak? New invention from outside the continent. Handheld death dealer. It lets see your backwards ass religious shit stop this bad boy. Kill him!"
The tall fool lit the fuse and aimed at Nomad, who had not moved a muscle. "If it is the spirit's will that I die today, so be it," he answered. "However, his power will not be stopped by a weapon like this." The sound was greater than any explosion. Yosef and his waitress had never heard anything of the like. Shrapnel burst from the barrel of the cannon, but in the same instant they closed in on Nomad, the shaman raised his hand. His eyes seemed to glow like blue fire. The pellet suddenly burst into flame and fell to the ground harmlessly, eroded in nothing but dust at the feet of the wandering shaman. Horrified, the man with the mane threw down the gun and ran cowardly away from the scene. The fat man rose in terror and fell on his round rump, backing away fast.
Damn it! Damn it, what the hell are you?"
"Just a nomad," the man said, and the man screamed and fled the inn with all haste, daring not to even look back as Nomad smiled at his leaving. As the men ran, Nomad turned and picked up his cloak laying on the floor, and his eyes returned their normal color. He bowed his head apologetically to the innkeeper and the waitress. "Forgive me," he sighed. "It was not my intention to frighten you. Thank you for the water." He then placed a small pouch of money on the desk near Yosef. "I hope this will pay for any damages I may have caused." He turned to walk away. "Wait!" the waitress cried. "You saved us. You protected our inn." "I merely did as the spirit asked me. He led me here."
"But still, you deserve thanks. Why not stay for a while?"
Yosef cried. The nomad paused a moment and smiled. "It would be nice to rest my feet for a day or two. But I cannot stay long. My work is not yet done."
"You can stay in our finest room," Yosef shouted. "I'll get you anything you need, and we'll throw a feast in—"
"No, thank you," Nomad laughed. "I will settle for a simple one-bedroom and no feast, please. The fewer people know that I'm here, the better." "But so many people in town hate shamans," the waitress said. "They need to know that you're a hero." "Many shamans are nothing more than charlatans," the nomad muttered. "They use smoke and mirrors, selling lies and peddling snake venom as medicine. It is wiser for the people here to be untrusting of most shamans. Let the actions of men speak for them rather than the title. It is for this reason I abandon my name and go by Nomad." "If most shamans are fake, then what are you?" she asked. "A prophet," Nomad smiled. "That will be enough for me." He smiled and touched the waitress girl's head in a caring pat. "I take my leave, and thank you for the hospitality." "Nomad!" the girl cried. "No matter what anyone here says, you're a hero!" Nomad grinned warmly at her and then at Yosef. "The One bless you." He muttered and walked to his room to retire for the day. The nomad would stay in town for another 2 days before leaving again. The bandits that once had plagued the town never returned to it for fear of the wrath of the terrible shaman within its walls. The people heard rumor of the shaman, but none dared get too close. Though Yosef and his staff tried to convince people of the truth, none were ready to accept that a shaman had come to their town to help. Despite this, Nomad was not upset. When he left, he took nothing but a walking staff and a small bag of food. He bowed and walked away. From that day on, the inn in Bismut never ran dry of customers. The place never suffered a storm's wrath or dealt with the pain of famine or disease. It was a miracle left by a mere wanderer who followed the will of a Holy Spirit. Part 2. The town of Cree had once stood as a haven to the weary wanderer. A mining town by trade, it was renowned for the mines that plunged deep into the mountain whose base it lay under. The great shadow of this titan made many of the residents feel safe and secure. However, this all changed when a dark cloud seemed to cover their sunny town. The mines, which once ran rich with rubies and gemstones, was drying up. The people could no longer make a living. The mines suffered no less than 4 cave-ins just from the miners' mad attempts to find something of value. People began to leave Cree, seeking new homes and new livelihoods. That is, until he came. A man arrived some 2 years ago. He was a man with no hair on his head. and missing his right arm. His long crimson cloak drifted behind him like a cape, and the lower half of his face was hidden by his collar. His narrow eyes were like those of a serpent, unblinking and cold. Strapped to his back was a massive sword that every local who saw him thought was useless to a one-armed man. When he arrived, the air seemed to grow thick with something unrecognizable. Something followed this being to their town, and the people felt it as if it were a physical beast. When the mayor came to greet him, he said one thing: "I hunger." Unnerved by his direct and cold statement, the people began to offer food or a feast for him, to which he ignored. His eyes fell this time on the mayor directly, whose face was drenched with a nervous sweat. The man leaned close, and his gravelly voice could barely be heard, whispering a single question. "What does your heart desire?" he growled. The mayor was greatly troubled by this question, for it did not come with the honeyed voice of a man who gave away things freely, but he felt compelled to answer. He wanted the same thing everyone in the town wanted: riches. He wanted to reestablish his town, and the man simply smiled. "Then from this day forward, your mine shall never run dry." And his word was true. The mines were overflowing with precious stones and minerals. The town began to flourish once more, drawing people back to its stores and its inns. The town of Cree was thriving economically, but there was something dark at work. The man, who revealed himself to be a shaman named Belzar, did not leave their town, and remained as a special guest to the mayor. With each passing day, the town grew richer, but the river near their town was beginning to dry up as fish were left on the banks, rotten and sick. The young and healthy one day were suddenly overcome with disease and misfortune. Rice and grain that once was bountiful was now decayed and scorched as if in a fire. Livestock ceased to produce milk or eggs. The town could not have been more rich, but at the cost of something far greater. The people began to urge Belzar leave them, but the mayor would not allow it. He insisted again and again that Belzar would heal their town as he had healed their mine. But 2 years had passed, and the rich town of Cree was a very forsaken place. In time, the people began to plead to the heavens for salvation, for pleading to Belzar only led to more misfortune. And no one could forget the first phrase he had said when he entered their village, for it was now on all of their lips. "I hunger." It was on a midsummer afternoon that another figure approached the town. As he came, a stir went through the town. He carried himself like a mere traveler, but they could all sense a strange presence about him. He entered Cree and looked around through tired eyes, and then saw a man carrying a pail of water. "Sir," the stranger called, "might I trouble you for a drink?"
"I don't have any to spare, stranger," he answered. "Water is rationed nowadays. There's just so little of it, and what little here is, it could make you sick anyway."
"Why live in such a way?" the stranger asked.
"I'm a miner by trade. I worked the mines my whole life," he answered. "I know no other life than this."
"This is not life. My friend, let me see your water." The miner looked curiously at the stranger and then held out his pail. The stranger held out his hand to the pail and sighed. "Your land is sick," the man whispered.
"Oh, we know this, stranger, but there's nothing we can do. We don't know what is causing it, and when we go to seek help from Belzar the shaman, he sometimes helps, but most of the time ignores."
At the sound of this name, the stranger stiffened and shook his head. "Your shaman is a foolish one indeed, and a knave to say the least." He touched the pail and closed his eyes. "I call upon the one spirit. Heal this water and bless this man and his house for sharing it with me." A wave seemed to wash over the miner and his body, and he felt a sudden spring to his step. What have you done?" "I have healed you and your water," the stranger smiled. "It is safe for you and your family, but in exchange, take me to the center of town. I'd like to meet this Belzar the shaman." Realizing this man was a shaman as well, he nodded and led him towards town. where people were already coming outside to see what was causing this pressure they sensed in the air and the ground. With each step the stranger took, the town felt a new resonance.
Sir, what is your name?
A miner asked. You may call me Nomad, he answered. As the people all stared and whispered about the arrival of the Nomad, this all drew out the shaman Belzar, who was looking slightly uncomfortable with Nomad's arrival. He approached the town square and looked to Nomad, whose eyes locked with his. There was a moment of silence between the two men, and several families and individuals observing from a distance quickly backed away, fearing for their own safety.
Behold, Belzar laughed, we are graced with the arrival of an uninvited guest.
Grace would do this town a great deal of good, Nomad answered. Belzar did not smile, but merely narrowed his glaring eyes.
You are not welcome here, wanderer,
he growled darkly, his voice low like gravel.
Leave at once.
You do not have the authority to command me, Nomad snarled. The venom in his voice even sent a chill down Belzar's spine. The power flowing off of these two was intoxicatingly thick. Belzar took a few steps forward, but did not dare raise a hand against the Nomad, and Nomad merely stared back, unmoving.
I sense that you, like me, serve a spirit. What did you sacrifice to yours? Belzar asked. All spirits demand payment. As you can see,
he motioned to his stump of an arm.
My price was high, but nothing I was not prepared to offer.
I gave my name and my identity, Nomad answered. I am his servant forevermore.
You are a slave, Belzar mocked, raising his finger accusingly. I can see the shackles of your spirit now. You are its slave, blindly obeying and following it like a lost dog. You have no autonomy. You did not just pay with your name. You paid with your pride, your ambitions, and your freedom.
Nomad's eyes widened at this and his shoulders tensed. Is that so? He asked. Belzar gave a faint smile and held out his hand as his eyes began to burn bright blue.
I serve the spirit Agaris, a spirit of great power, but also of giving, Belzar explained. In exchange for a mere arm, I have all this power. I live how I please, go where I wish. My will supersedes all things. I do not wear the shackles of a slave as you do. It pains me to see a shaman such as you, with no will of your own.
Nomad did not answer, but his eyes did narrow somewhat, as if thinking over the words.
It must be very difficult, serving your spirit so fervently and without rest.
I admit, Nomad nodded. It is a trial by fire most days.
Tell me, my friend, shall I free you?
Free me? Nomad asked.
You must have a goal, correct? All men desire something they can possess for their own. There is something you desire in this life, something you hunger for. Money, fame, power. Just speak. Share your hunger with me, boy. What do you long for? What is it that you appetize after?
At first, Nomad did not reply, but his body was indeed beginning to tremble somewhat, and the thickness of his power seemed to be waning. Nomad took a single step back and closed his eyes as memories spilled through his mind of a small boy surrounded by bigger and stronger brothers, of being forgotten, of being small. I did once long for acknowledgement, Nomad admitted.
With the power of Agaris, you can have that and more. You can have that which you desire, he whispered. Let me show you. Let me offer you another chance, boy.
You're right, Nomad whispered. I once did yearn for fame and glory. I grew up amongst men and women far greater than me.
Then why suffer under the thumb of one who will not let you reach your true aspirations?
Belzar asked. He walked close and reached out to Nomad as if to take his hand.
Come with me. Let me rid you of your curse, and properly rid you of your hunger.
But you see, Belzar, Nomad continued, you may be right about me, but you're wrong about my relationship to the One. With a flash like brilliant fire, Nomad's eyes roared with blue fire as the tattoos on his body glowed gloriously, like his very flesh was igniting. Belzar flew backwards in disbelief.
What? Why?
I am no slave to the One, Nomad answered. I am free. I have autonomy, but I know that my will and my wishes are folly. The things I desire are fleeting and empty. Fame and glory, acknowledgement from mortal men. These things will never satisfy hunger. The more worldly wealth and gratification you accumulate, the more empty you become, until there's nothing but an empty void of gluttony that can never be satiated. Nomad held out his hand as the very ground trembled from his aura. I know of your spirit, Agaris. He is a spirit of greed and gluttony. He has given you power in exchange for what you believe is freedom, but in truth, it is a most cunning chain around your neck.
You dare mock me,
he sneered. The curse of Agaris infects this town. You give wealth, but leave men's souls and bellies empty, yet you yourself do not suffer these things. You must satiate Agaris, or suffer yourself. Is that not correct? Nomad asked. Belzar did not answer, but sneered and drew his mighty sword, the metal flashing dangerously in the sun. Belzar, tell me, was your arm all that you paid for Agaris's power? Or perhaps did you lose something even more precious than that?
Be silent, you cur, Belzar snapped. I shall sever your head from your shoulders.
He attacked with maddening speed, his spirit loaning him great reserves of power. Nomad's eyes flashed and he ducked the blade, raising his hand up, brushing his hand against Belzar's shoulder, almost as if dusting it off, but the shockwave of this brush threw him sideways, as if being hurled by a mighty wind. Belzar rebounded off of a crumbling shack and snarled angrily. Nomad glared at him as suddenly Belzar seemed to be hunching over, his body twitching dangerously. His eyes now turned a horrifying crimson color as the veins in his bald head pulsated, and then he spoke with a voice that was not his own.
I hunger.
Nomad watched in horror as the figure that was Belzar rushed him again, but this time with a speed so great, Nomad had to throw himself to the ground. Belzar missed Nomad with his sword and ravenously bit the air, as if he intended to bite Nomad himself.
Hunger.
Now I see, Nomad whispered darkly. Your arm was not the price you paid for Agaris's power. It was something more precious. Belzar spun, almost fully possessed by the power of Agaris. With a guttural roar, he came at Nomad again. Nomad lowered himself and closed his eyes, letting himself surrender, but not to Belzar. My master, Nomad whispered, I beg your blessing. Be my strength and be my protection. A great torrent of power overcame Nomad, and when he opened his eyes, the brilliant light that shone off his body seemed to dim even the sun. Belzar slowed, hesitating in his attack, as Nomad shot forward, palm drawn back to strike. By the power of the King of Spirits, I purge you from this place, Agaris! Begone! He thrust his palm forward and struck Belzar full in the chest. There was a loud and sickening recoil force as pressure wave erupted in all directions, and a strange light shot clean from Nomad's palm and threw Belzar like a thrown javelin. The force of his palm strike sent Belzar flying backwards, blood spraying from an open mouth, and his eyes glazing over. When he hit the ground, Nomad returned to his relaxed posture as the glow slowly left his body, returning him to his state from before. On the ground, Belzar remained open-mouthed and drooling. In exchange for power, Belzar, you must satisfy the appetite of your spirit. But Agaris can never be satisfied, and so now neither can you. He approached and leaned down, placing his hand upon Belzar's stump of an arm and taking note of the wound. The ragged, uneven pattern of bite marks was slightly evident. The sight disgusted him, and he rose to his feet. What a horrible curse you placed upon yourself. Who of us is truly the slave, Belzar? He then looked back at the few people who remained and sighed tiredly. He slumped his shoulders and looked down. Forgive me, he called. I fear you will not reap the wealth you did while Belzar's influence remained with you.
Lord,
one man cried, dropping to his knees, tears in his eyes.
it is we who beg your forgiveness.
None is needed, Nomad answered. All I ask is a bed to rest upon for the night. Then I will leave.
But what shall we do with Belzar? He asked, stepping forward and looking at the dead body.
He can do no more harm to you, Nomad asked. Carry his body out of the town and take him into the deep woods. There he will awake, and you will see him no more. Nomad then walked away from Belzar and made his way towards the inn on the other side of the town. I take my leave.
The people gasped and ran to him, pleading with him to stay longer, or at least let them offer him thanks.
They offered him many riches, for they still had much from the mines. Nomad turned it all away, only accepting a cheap room in the inn. People flocked from all around town to see him, to thank him, to offer money or gems, for they still had more than they needed. But Nomad would not even look at their gifts. He simply sat in his room in silence, whispering thanks of his own to the softly spirit who had freed him so long ago. Thank you, my master, Nomad whispered. Because of you, I am always satisfied. So I saw a question in chat asking what the look-alike was. Well, luckily for you guys, Jay drew almost all the villains in this series. So I will share with you what each villain looks like that he drew. Let me pull it up, and I will show you Belzar. Jay always makes very large pictures, so bear with me. This was Belzar's image. The spirit of gluttony. So the whole thing with Belzar was that he, if you couldn't quite follow it, he is possessed by a spirit of gluttony. And basically, he is forever hungry. So to satiate that hunger, he takes from other towns and forces them to be hungry in his stead. So that is him. All right, we'll take that down. We'll move on to the next one. Let's keep this going. Part 3.
You're insane, you know that?
The captain mumbled, scratching his forehead in nervous reproach. He was sitting on the deck of his ship as a tall young man stood before him wearing a cloak and hood. He could barely make out the man's face, but it seemed young and with wild hair to hide his mysterious eyes. The young stranger looked rather out of place standing aboard his boat, but then again, something about this man told the captain he'd stick out anywhere he went. The young man just smiled at the same strange grin he had when he first approached on the dock. Not insane, just faithful, he answered.
Same difference, son, the captain spat, standing up with a groan. Kid, these waters ain't what they used to be. It's a storm season now, and with them pirates and sea serpents scouring the water, I ain't taking no chances on them now. You can try some other ship. Besides, this one's seen better days.
The young man didn't move from his spot, seemingly gazing into the captain's very soul.
I'll put it another way. I said beat it, you brat.
How about an arrangement? The young man replied. Take me across the sea, and I'll pay you double the usual rate.
It isn't about money, lad. It's about security. I ain't taking no chances with pirates and monsters. The storms be bad enough without them, but with them, the sailor worth his salt would.
It is imperative that I get across the sea to the town of Charton, the young man explained. I've been called there, and I must not delay. He walked closer to the ship captain and held out a small pouch of gold coins. I will pay you for the journey and expenses, and as for the dangers ahead, I can personally assure you that no harm will befall this ship while I am aboard.
Got some divine providence, son?
The captain chuckled. Do we have a deal, Captain? The young man asked. The captain stared a moment and then shook his head. There was something so strange about the kid. There wasn't a hint of fear on his face, but instead pure determination. The captain felt a sense of something else as well, a weight that the boy carried. He then glanced at the sky and smelled the spray of the salty sea air. He stretched his arms and took the money from him.
Fine, it's a deal. Guess I'd rather die at sea anyway.
You will not die, Captain, the boy answered assuredly, and I'll further compensate you when we reach Charton.
Sure thing, lad. We're shoving off,
the captain bellowed. The crew that had been mingling around looked up surprised and suddenly leapt into action, running to undo the ropes that held the boat to the dock and to release the sails to catch the headwind. The captain walked to his post at the stern of the ship to man the helm. He glanced out and smiled to himself. The sea was a grand but harsh mistress. He'd known it since he was a child, and he'd sailed its waters as a fisherman before becoming a ferrying craft. Once he'd even been in a naval fleet and sailed all over the oceans. But he'd never seen the seas quite like this. A few weeks ago, pirates began frequenting these waters and attacking lonely vessels without reservation. There had been no shortage of sightings of strange monsters beneath the waves, waiting to plunge all unwary ships into the depths. Worse yet, storm season was upon them, and sailing under the conditions of a fierce maelstrom was nothing short of reckless. All common sense he had told him this was suicide. But that kid, he had been so confident. The way he spoke and the look in his eyes seemed to radiate a sense of power. It was as if he already knew the dangers ahead before he'd even boarded the ship, and yet the dangers meant nothing to him. He looked out and saw the strange young man standing on the bow of the ship, looking out of the oceans beyond.
"What's our heading, Captain?" one of the men shouted. "Charton," he shouted back. "If the winds stay on our side, we'll be there by midday tomorrow. Let's get our bearings and head to the northeast."
Sir, are you sure about this?" the man called. "I don't trust this wind. Methinks a storm is coming on its heels."
"Aye, I agree. But with any luck, we'll outrun it. That young man seems to think the dangers are meaningless, so let's hope he's right."
Captain, you think he's a shaman or something?"
"It's possible," the captain replied. "And if he is, we might just be in luck. Seen a lot of them shamans before, and they always manage to pull off some bizarre stuff out of their arse."
He gripped the helm and began to turn it towards the eastern sky.
"Let's hope it's the same this time."
Storm clouds descended upon the boat in the night like a thief, silent and unwanted. The darkness of the sky became even more foreboding and wicked as thunder clapped and lightning cut the sea. Rain fell in debilitating sheets that brought the men to their knees. The boards of the ship seemed to creak under the weight of the downpour. Men screamed and ran for cover, trying hard to keep the ship from tipping as the waves became furious, growling like hungry beasts, and smashing against the wooden deck until men slipped and stumbled about. Two nearly fell overboard as they battled to bring sails back up. The captain cursed under his breath as he battled the furious sea. This was his punishment, the price to pay for his faith in that lunatic below deck. And where was he now? Where was that fool who claimed they could get across the sea in one piece?
Damn him! Damn him! Bring that useless guest up here this instant, the captain roared. If we're sinking, I want him to see what his determination brought us.
The crew nodded their agreement, and two ran down to fetch the young man. The captain turned his attention back to the helm and struggled with all his might to hold it in place as another monster wave smashed into the port of the ship, sending his crew scattering along the deck like scattered fruits.
"Here he is, Captain!" one shouted,
dragging the man up out of the rainy deck. He was no longer wearing his hooded cloak and was half naked, revealing strange tattoos all over his body and wild hair that looked uncombed and unkempt. The captain glared at him and then turned to his men.
"Throw him overboard!" the captain shouted. "Show him how merciful this sea is that he thought could be so underestimated."
The men grabbed the young man by the arms, who yanked himself free of them forcefully. "Why are you trying to kill me?" the young man asked. "The journey is not over."
"It is for you!" the captain bellowed, battling the helm again. "I warned you, brat! I told you what waited for us on these waters, but you insisted we come. You were so sure of what was waiting for us. Serves me right for trusting some shaman. Now get the hell off my ship!"
"Captain, what did you think would happen when I asked you to go with me on this journey?" the man asked. "Did you think the dangers and the trials would just vanish because a shaman was on board? Did you really assume that the evils and terrors of this world would shrink back because of my presence?" The crew for a moment stared at the man dumbfounded, unable to understand his implication.
"You mean you knew we'd be hit by a storm?"
"Not that I knew. but that I didn't let that possibility stand in my way, the man answered. The presence of danger does not vanish simply because we wish it to go away. We are always confronted by trials and threats, but it is by faith that we persevere. You, Captain, have faith in your crew and your ship, which is why you, even now, battled the storm with all you have, believing even now there is a chance to survive. If you were assured of our death, you would not be standing so defiantly now. I see genuine faith and determination in your eyes, Captain, and that is commendable. The captain had no answer to the boy and simply glared at him in disbelief. But I have faith in something far greater than a ship. The young man walked away from the shock-stricken crew and walked onto the bow of the ship and stared out at the hurricane before him. He closed his eyes, and for a moment it appeared that the storm would simply whisk him away into the wind. But then it happened. "Captain, look!" The boy was glowing. His eyes opened to reveal glowing light, and his tattoos also seemed to ignite like fire. The weight the captain felt before was back again, and it was overwhelming. The boy held out his hands and spoke to the winds. "My master, blessed be your name and power. You have brought me this far and shall see me further. I ask thee to aid me. Grant me your power and blessing so that this obstacle may stand aside by your will." He then held out his hands and began to spread them apart, as if brushing away a pair of curtains on a window. And as he did, the clouds began to dissipate. The thunder's loud roar seemed to dim, and the waves that once were as high as the ship's mast fell back in fear of the man who stood upon the bow. The bow moved, and the boy moved his body in a fluid-like manner, and the sea responded by pushing the boat further and faster. The wind, which once seemed all but uncontrollable, now turned its attention to the sail and pushed it like a giant's hand towards the exit of the storm. The men said nothing. They did nothing. They simply stared in awe at the divine power they were witnessing. What did he do?" one man cried. "It's sorcery! No, he's a shaman! I've never seen a shaman do that!" The men murmured and hummed their disbelief as the moon reappeared in the sky above. The storm clouds divided and pushed aside to allow the ship to pass through. "Captain," the shaman spoke up so the captain could hear him, who was now standing jaw-dropped. "Having faith does not mean that trials won't come. Rather, faith is the strength to confront the trials and overcome them." "What are you, lad?" the captain asked. "I am a nomad," he answered, "and it was not by my power that the storm was brought under control, but by the one Spirit, the one I serve. While my faith is in him, there is no storm I cannot overcome." The captain gazed at the stranger in disbelief, but then his open mouth turned to a smile. "You're something else, kid. Call it faith if you like, but I still say it's outstanding," the captain answered. "My apologies for trying to throw you off the ship earlier." Nomad smiled and gave a polite bow before walking back towards the hatch. "I'll take my leave now, Captain. Wake me if anything changes." As he descended, the crew just stared after him, murmuring about how incredible the sight they'd just seen was. However, the dangers were not past, and the captain knew this. He might end up waking the sleeping nomad sooner rather than later, but for now it was enough that the storm was no longer a factor. "All right, look alive. Let's get back underway. No telling how long this storm is going to stay back." "Aye, sir," the crew shouted, running back to their post to continue the journey. But the storm did not come back to bear. Instead, it stayed at a distance well into the early morning. With the aid of the wind, the crew had been able to return to their course in incredible time. But something was still eating at the captain. If the storm was holding back for them, then there would likely be others who took advantage of this opportunity. He had a watchman out on the crow's nest looking out for anything that appeared suspicious or unwanted. The evening had been uneventful, but with the light of day dawning, there was a likelihood that something might be spotted this time. "Anything!" the captain shouted. There was a pause, and then suddenly a terrified scream. "Ship! Coming at us, Captain! Look aft!" The captain turned, and to his horror there was indeed a ship coming not far off, and its flags were anything but friendly. There was a sense of dread coming off of it, and the captain could feel his blood running cold. "Pirates, Captain!" "We should abandon the cargo, sir. They won't chase us if they don't have anything to steal," one man offered. The captain looked to them a moment and pondered such a notion. It would be an easy way to avoid conflict, but then he remembered. A single youth standing on the bow of his ship. and with nothing but faith in a wave of his hands, a storm bowed to his whim.
"The hell I will," the captain snarled. "I ain't gonna be outstaged by a young pup like that. They want the ship. They gotta take it over our dead bodies."
Chapter 4. When sailing over these seas, there are many rules and unspoken truths that must be understood and followed without question by any ship captain. Captain Jurgen knew them all well. He'd been on these waters since he was small enough to just reach his father's knee, and since then he'd seen just about everything the ocean had to offer. In any pirate attack like this, the unspoken truth was that if you can't escape them on a faster ship, then it's best to surrender and give them what they want. Fighting back or trying to flee would only make them angrier. He'd had his fair share of pirate raids before. They were brutish, but usually not keen to sink ships or kill captains. After all, sunk ships and dead captains meant the loss of repeat customers. But why not just follow that same rule here? Because today was a day for breaking rules, it seemed. That lad before, he couldn't be older than 20 or so years. He was green when it came to sailing and filled with a naive attitude that made him want to laugh, but Jurgen was amazed by him. The way he'd stood upon the bow and with a single gesture made the storm clouds split. Even now they hung at bay, as if still under the command of the lad who was now surely resting below deck. It shouldn't be possible. It couldn't be possible. But it was, beyond any form of convention. So what's to say another miracle couldn't happen? Jurgen wasn't one to believe in miracles, but now he'd take that gamble. "Captain!" his first mate shouted. "The ship is bearing down and they're loading cannons. Toss overboard any cargo we can afford to lose and lighten the vessel. Turn the vessel hard to port and see if we can't shake their guns. Tell all souls below deck to brace for impact." "Aye, Captain!" The first mate ran to issue his orders as Jurgen turned his attention back to the bow. The exit of the storm was just ahead. If they weren't being chased, it would be a sign of hope for them, but it would only be more difficult outside of the storm clouds. That pirate ship would have open seas to pursue him. What could be going through their minds as they sailed between angry, withheld storm clouds? The water near the ship suddenly exploded in a geyser of foam and spray, sending two sailors tumbling to the deck. "Captain! Orders!" one sailor cried.
"Load the aft cannon!"
Jurgen shouted back. The ship was a merchant and trade ship. It wasn't heavily armed. He had but 2 cannons, with each to engage in battle, and one was on the rear of the ship.
"Don't fire until I give the order!"
The crew bustled and ran furiously to their posts. Jurgen looked back at the ship as it drew ever closer. He could see the pirates on board loading another set of cannonballs. It was his opportunity. The pirates had set their cannons on the bow of the ship and had a whole unit of 4 sailors manning them. Foolish. The large number of bodies would make visibility more difficult for them.
"Wait for the next surge!"
he shouted. The crew waited with bated breath. Though the storm was being held back, the waves it created were still reaching them. One great surge lifted his ship up and above the pirate ship, but as it passed, the pirate ship began to rise with the wave, just enough for the keel to be visible.
"Fire!"
The cannon fired a single shot which grazed the bottom of the pirate ship, but it wasn't a direct blow. The wind and surging waters were just throwing it off.
"Reload!"
He bellowed, but it was too late. The pirate ship would be upon them before they could fire again. In fact, he could hear the roar of anger and fury as the pirates got ever closer. He knew their tactics well, so he had to prepare.
"Captain, orders!" the first mate begged. "Draw swords and prepare for combat."
"But Captain, we ain't got a prayer." Jurgen pointed to the sky so his mates could all see.
"Do you see those clouds, lads?" he cried. "One young pup managed to split the heavens so we could pass safely. If a runt like him could do something like that, then I'll shave my beard if I can't defend my own ship from some bilge rats. If we're to die, then I'm glad it'll be on the water."
His men all gave a hurrah and prepared themselves for the inevitable. If any felt fear, they tried not to show it, as the whizzing sound of grappling hooks could be heard over the salty wind. The hooks flew toward the ship and latched on tight. Their vessel lurched and the men trembled as the pirate ship was now truly upon them.
"Cut their lines and ready the port cannon!"
Jurgen roared. His men scurried to the side of the ship to cut the lines, but it wouldn't be enough. The pirates were already jumping on board the ship. Pirates, like sailors, come in all shapes and sizes. These men were large and fierce. Some were large and fat, while others were skinny and muscled. They had tattoos all over their bodies, and some had no teeth in their shouting mouths. One, wearing nothing but a pair of torn pants, came roaring up the stern of the ship to attack Jurgen. He drew his saber and blocked the wild strike. Jurgen looked past him to see pirates bearing down on the crew. All of his crew knew the basics of sword combat, but none were seasoned veterans, and they would be overwhelmed soon. Their outlook was bleak, but he would fight anyway. He swung a punch and struck the pirate in the gut, forcing him back. He then swung his blade and gutted the assailant before running down to support his soldiers. "Get that cannon ready!" he shouted, and in mere moments the deck was teeming with roaring and raving pirates, terrified but battled sailors. Jurgen threw himself onto the front lines, desperate to hold the line and keep his men confident. It was a losing battle, but fight on he did. Men fell covered in blood and swords clattered. A few pirates suffered the same fate. Jurgen couldn't be more proud of his men, bravely fighting back and sneering defiantly at the pirates. The sight of the heavens constantly reminded them of the power one boy could wield with a little faith. "Cannon ready, Captain!" one sailor below Drek screamed. "Then fire!" Jurgen bellowed. It took all of a few seconds to see the impact of that decision. The pirate ship lurched backwards. Any pirates that were attempting to cross over as the ship lurched fell screaming into the sea. The pirates who were on the deck had broken their focus to see what had happened, only to be gutted and killed by the angry and invigorated crew. Jurgen fought alongside them all. "That's the way, lads!" Jurgen shouted. "Fight on! Keep going!" "That's enough!" There was a rapid-fire sound of cannonballs. The ship rocked with anguish as 3 cannons buried themselves in the sides of the ship and caused the whole thing to rock. Water sloshed the deck and knocked sailors over. Pirates rejoined the fray, and soon the entire crew was pushed back. "The next volley will aim for the bottom of your boat. Drop your swords or we'll sink you," the pirate captain yelled, standing from his viewpoint on the starboard side of his own ship. Jurgen looked at him furiously, and then at his men. He couldn't ask them to fight now. If the ship sank, none of them would survive. He cursed and spat on the ground as he sank to one knee, laying his saber down. "I'm sorry, men," he muttered. His men all fearfully began to lay down their swords as well, dropping to their knees as pirates approached to relieve them of their weapons and bind their hands. Jurgen had lost. So much for his faith. The captain swung over wearing a fancy coat he'd clearly stolen from a naval officer. He had a scraggly beard and thick leather boots. He marched to Jurgen and spat in his face angrily. His breath and demeanor both smelled as foul. He kicked Jurgen in the chest, causing him to cough, and the pirates laughed. "You cost me quite some trouble, you old badger," the captain snarled. "Could have just given up quietly. Handed over the ship like a good old man." "Go to hell," Jurgen snapped, "for the trouble you caused me. I think I'll kill 4 of your crew and sell the rest off as slaves to an outlying land." "What? He can't! Captain Jurgen!" "Silence!" the pirate captain sneered. "It's your own captain's fault for pissing me off and damaging my ship. Why don't you just kill me, dog?" Captain Jurgen whispered, shame dripping from his wounded voice. "Because the next time you sail the sea, Captain Jurgen, I want you to see my flag and remember who I am, and know exactly what the consequences will be for fighting back," he laughed. He then turned to his crew. "Grab the youngest and haul them over here." The 2 men he looked to grinned and ran to a young man only 24 years old. His name was Frederick. Everyone on the ship called him Mama's boy because he always talked about his mother back home in Edelis. "No!" Jurgen shouted as Frederick was dragged crying to the captain's feet. "Let him go, you ugly bastard!" Jurgen bellowed. "Look at him, Captain," the pirate captain smirked. "Tell the young man it'll be okay. Tell him he'll be all right. I do love it when people are lied to right before they die." Captain Jurgen," Frederick whimpered. "It's all right, son," Jurgen whispered. "You're all right, lad." Frederick continued to whimper and cry as a sword was waved just above his neck. "Mom!" Frederick screamed. "Frederick!" the crew bellowed, wanting to run forward and save the doomed boy. There was a sudden rush of wind. The storm clouds that had been held back all this time were suddenly beginning to roll back to their original position, and rain was falling upon the ship in sheets. The pirate captain looked up at the clouds in dismay. "First they part for us, then they come back? What the hell is with this bizarre storm?" "Captain, our ship will sink if we don't get out of the typhoon," one pirate growled. "Let's kill the brat and go." "Right. Grab what cargo you can and we'll ship off," he smirked. "Looks like you lucked out, Captain. Only one dies today." He raised his sword to strike down Frederick. "Consider yourself blessed." "That's enough." He moved like a spirit and stopped between the captain's sword and Frederick. He reached out his hand and grabbed the captain's wrist in a vice-like grip that did not yield anything. He still wore no shirt, and his tattoos, like before, seemed to glow a brilliant energy that Captain Jurgen could not explain. "What?" the captain cried. Sorry I'm late, Nomad answered. When the ship lurched, I fell over and hit my head. Nomad pointed to the crown of his head where a small spot of blood could be seen. I blacked out for a bit. Sure took your sweet time, lad, Captain Jurgen sighed. Nomad then turned to the pirate captain and shoved him backwards away from Frederick. Kindly leave this ship, he offered. If you don't, you'll die on a sinking one.
Who are you to threaten me?
The captain snarled, rushing forward to gut Nomad with his sword. Nomad sidestepped the thrust and swung an open palm forward to the captain's head. His eyes glowed brilliant white for a fraction of a second, and suddenly there was an explosion of power, and the captain was shot backwards across the deck from starboard to port. The pirate crew dropped the cargo they were stealing, and the sailors that were holding captive to attack. Nomad glared at them and waved his hand as if brushing a bug out of the air. The storm gale rose with a growl and knocked the pirates to the deck as if they were just a nuisance. These men defended their ship with faith and honor, Nomad shouted to the pirates. I will not let you take their lives. As the pirates stared at him, the captain's face went pale as a sheet.
You're a shaman! A shaman! What's a shaman doing on a trading ship?
That's my business, Nomad answered. He didn't even need to answer his question before the pirates were clamoring for the safety of their own ship. None wanted to be locked in combat with a shaman, not in a storm like this. Get back to the ship! Let's get out of here, Captain! The captain of the pirates snarled at Nomad and turned to escape his ship.
Fine. I'll just sink this whole blasted thing into the sea and you along with it. Ready the cannons!
Nomad glared at him and then sighed.
What? Nothing to say, you magical freak?
Those who peddle in death and sin will be swallowed by it. And you, Captain, shall be swallowed by the sea. The pirate just sneered and jumped back onto his ship, detaching their lines and finally separating themselves. As they pulled away, Captain Jurgen could see them loading their cannons.
Get the ship out of here, Jurgen bellowed. We can't afford a direct hit from those cannons.
Don't worry, Captain, Nomad explained. Their cannons will never touch us. He took a step onto the port side railing and held out his hands to the water beyond him. And suddenly, the energy that glowed around him was visible once more as an intoxicating and heavy glow. The sea below began to change its flow and direction as if obeying the glowing energy. I beseech you, my master, Nomad cried, aid me one more time. These villains who would bring harm and sin in equal measure, let them disappear from your sight. Let the ocean they abuse claim them. Nomad brought his arms together in a swirling motion and began to pull down. Whirlpool! A sailor cried. It's a giant whirlpool! Captain Jurgen looked out to see it was indeed a whirlpool. As if out of nowhere, a great spinning vacuum of water was appearing just beneath the pirate ship.
Where did that come from?
Jurgen cried. Captain, I suggest we leave now, Nomad sighed, lowering his hands and allowing his glowing body to finally begin to return to normal. He hopped down and the captain looked out at the breaking and sinking pirate ship as its crew fell screaming into the Charybdis that Nomad had created. He glanced back at Nomad in disbelief. He had been saved again by a boy with unbelievable power.
No time for lagging, men. The exit's just in sight. Unfurl the sail, get us out of here.
Aye, Captain. Captain Jurgen didn't say anything to Nomad until they were safe and out of the storm. The crew was all relaxing and whispering amongst themselves how close they'd all come to death. Frederick was sitting with his friends, a blanket over his body and tea in his hands. He was consoled and hugged by his fellow crewmates, praising him for his bravery. Jurgen went to the bow of the ship to see Nomad sitting there, his legs crossed and his eyes closed, as if he were meditating.
You all right, lad? He asked.
I'm thanking the one for aiding us. My master has saved us once more.
About that. I'm in your debt, young man, the captain muttered. My crew.
Captain, it's I who am indebted to you. You agreed to take me to sea in the first place. While I slept, you fought with all your faith and valor. If you had surrendered, I would have still been unconscious as we sank into the sea, Nomad explained. It was my master's will that I come aboard your ship. Only a man with faith like yours could have seen us through.
I ain't one for faith, lad. Honestly, I don't think I would have done any of that fighting unless you hadn't stopped that storm like you did before.
Then it was the master's will all the same. You ferried me safe and sound across the sea, and he taught you to be a man of faith. Nomad smiled. Captain Jurgen just chuckled in reply.
You're a strange one, lad.
He laughed. I get that a lot.
If you don't mind my asking,
ask what you wish.
You said you wanted to sail to Charton.
What are you looking for there? Some kind of shaman convention? Nomad shook his head. A few nights ago, the One gave me a vision of Charton, of a darkness there. Darkness? I can't say for certain, but I believe a spirit of great and terrible power has taken hold there. I expect a shaman is responsible.
What'll you do when you find them? Jurgen asked. Anything we can do to help you?
Nomad laughed and beamed at Jurgen. You already have helped me plenty, my friend. Jurgen smiled and placed a hand on Nomad's shoulder.
My ship is yours, anytime you need a lift, young man. And whatever this master of yours takes you, I wish you safety.
I won't always be safe, Jurgen, but I will always have faith. Nomad answered as he gazed out at the rising sun beyond them, and the coastal town of Charton in the distance. Alright, we'll pause there for a moment so I can show you the image that Jay drew for these bits, because he did draw another one. It was this one. Again, big picture. That was the image that Jay drew for those two chapters. I think it's one of my favorites that he did. All right. So now that you've seen it, I'll take it down. And we'll move on to the next one. Chapter 5. Charton was not a beautiful city. Governed for many years by corrupted governors and regents, the city teemed with the lowest dredges of society. Gangs and punks walked the streets, enforcing their will upon others through brute force and at the end of a blade. It was once said that no man who valued security would set foot in Charton. In this city, truly the weak were trampled under the foot of the strong. However, when news spread that a shaman had risen in Charton, many assumed this would bring great change. Indeed it had, but not in the way anyone expected. Within a month of the shaman's arrival, the city had been razed to the ground. Structures and places of worship had been decimated. The governor's mansion was now a pile of rubble, and only a few structures remained standing amidst the flames. As the stranger from the port set foot in the town, he looked upon the destruction, and his eyes narrowed in anger. He brushed black hair out of his eyes and brushed his ashes aside from his bandaged hands. Despite Charton's foul reputation, they didn't deserve this. No one did.
Please!
A voice cried out. The stranger turned his attention to the voice and saw a man with a woman behind him run up to him. He wore practically rags, and his hands were bloody banknotes. The woman was in tears and clinging to the man's ragged clothes helplessly.
Please, please, do you have a ship? The woman begged. Let us go with you. Take us away from here.
Who are you? The stranger asked.
Please, if it's money, I have plenty. I'll pay you whatever you like. Just get us out of... Ah!
The man looked beyond the stranger and screamed at what he saw, crawling away fast. The woman shrieked, and the stranger looked back to see what they were looking at. A weight could be felt there. Something powerful. Standing on the ruins of an old hotel was a young man around the same age as the stranger. He was muscled and shirtless, grinning wickedly with a massive scythe-like weapon, almost twice as big as he was. It rested on his shoulder as easily as if it were a bale of straw, and he laughed.
Run all you want, you old fool, he shouted. Come on.
What's wrong? He shouted, raising his scythe-like weapon.
Didn't you say yourself once justice is for those who take it? Well, I'm about to take it from your wretched hide.
He chucked the scythe like a throwing knife, and it only barely missed the man, whimpering and sniveling as he scurried into hiding in the alleyway again. What's the meaning of this? The stranger shouted at the assailant. The killer stopped and looked at the stranger, and his eyes widened.
Another shaman, he gasped. I can feel it on you.
He then sneered confidently.
Welcome to Charton, newcomer. And what's your name?
Call me Nomad, he answered. The shaman's eyes widened even more, and he took a hesitant step back.
You're him. Servant of the One, he hissed, and then snarled and jumped down, picking up his scythe again. No, there's nothing to fear from you. You're nothing to me. What's become of this city? Nomad asked. I dispense justice upon it, he replied. Justice? Is that what you call this destruction? Why not? The shaman asked. In this city, the might make right. Justice is only for those willing to take it, and with those who have the power to do so. So I sought power. I searched for a way to become the might and make my right. Now the bastards scream and cower at my name. My name that is Drayton. Drayton, Nomad answered. I sense a powerful spirit influencing you. I sense the presence of Jabu. Yes, Jabu is the spirit who I have sworn to, Drayton shrugged. He promised me power and confidence, and he delivered. I'm unstoppable now. In this city, I am the law. I am the governor. I am the king. Jabu is the spirit of pride and self-adoration. He loves nothing but himself and his own interests. The sensations you feel are a mask, Drayton. Relieve yourself of him and end this foolishness. Drayton let out a laugh, and his body began to glow as the power of his spirit washed over him. You can talk big, but you're nothing, Nomad. You're simply jealous of the power Jabu offers me. I am in every way your superior. Stop this at once, Drayton, Nomad cautioned. This won't end well for you. Don't tell me what to do, weakling, Drayton hissed. No one tells Drayton what to do anymore. No one lords over me. I'm not the cowardly little punk in the gutter. I am power. I am invincible. So die, you pathetic insect! Drayton attacked, swinging his scythe with unbelievable speed for its size. Nomad dove out of the way and swung a backwards kick at Drayton's head. Drayton laughed and caught the kick in his hand, and then freeing his other hand from the scythe, he backhanded Nomad away into a pile of rubble not far off. Nomad grunted and stood again. The strength of Drayton was unbelievable. Drayton set down his scythe and attacked Nomad with his bare hands. Nomad defended, deflecting the blows as best he could, channeling the power of the One into his arms as he tried to cancel out the power of Jabu. But even that wasn't enough. It wasn't just Jabu. Drayton was fiercely strong and tenacious. You feel it now, he laughed. He broke through Nomad's defenses and grabbed him by the throat, squeezing. My power, my speed, my experience. You don't even come close to me. Nomad kicked away from Drayton and struck him hard with the force of his palm. Drayton took the strike and coughed, but then laughed and punched Nomad square in the jaw, sending him sprawling. Is that it? Even with your spirit's help, you're no match for me, Nomad. Drayton laughed. He walked to Nomad and planted a booted foot upon his head. You have no idea what I've been through, what I've had to undergo. I grew up in this wretched hive of serpents. I watched gangs and crime bosses beat, steal, kill, and raped. I watched helpless. I couldn't do anything to stop it. But I knew I was destined to. Even as a child, I knew one day I'd destroy their whole disgusting city and show them real justice. It was my destiny, my right. He stomped down on Nomad's head, laughing as he recollected and monologued about himself. And then I met Jabu, and he showed me the key to unlocking my greatness. Now I'm the one in charge. I'm not weak anymore. I hold all the power. I hold the key to justice. Justice is power. Those like you who would stand in the way of that power are simply scum, just like them. Nomad struggled and finally freed himself from Drayton's hold and swiftly attacked with a powerful knee strike to Drayton's ribs. Drayton took the blow and retaliated with one of his own. He grabbed Nomad by the arm and threw him out of the rubble and sent him crashing into the street, blood spilling from Nomad's mouth. It felt like he'd broken at least 3 bones. So, still think you can look down on me, Nomad? Drayton laughed. He walked to his weapon and lifted it, twirling it with ease. You have great power, Drayton, Nomad whispered through bloody teeth. So now you recognize it. Good. He then raised the scythe. I notice you don't have any weapons, Nomad. Poor choice when it comes getting to a place like Charton. Don't worry, though. You won't live long enough to regret it. He brought the blade down, and Nomad rolled out of the way. Oh, you're still smart enough to dodge me? Power like yours is rare, Drayton. Even without the influence of Jabu, you could have done so much with the power you have naturally. But now you're a slave to him. He has become your confidence and your lifeline. You've lost, Drayton. You boast of your great strength, but truly only the weak flaunt false power. Shut your arrogant mouth! Drayton roared as he struck at Nomad again. Nomad felt the weight of his fist and fell back, but then climbed to his feet and held up his hands to the sky, closing his eyes. You're stronger than me in every way, Drayton. But the reason I do not carry weapons is because the One is my weapon. Though I am weak, he is far stronger. Bear witness to the power of one who is greater than all, the King of Spirits. The ground shook furiously, and Nomad's body was engulfed by glorious light. Drayton was thrown backwards and forced to grab the ground to support himself. When he looked up, his heart caught in his throat. Nomad stood still as a statue, but now a great light was emanating all around him, glowing and even scorching the ground like it was engulfed in fire. Drayton stared in awe and disbelief at the raw power he was witnessing. The waves beyond them at the sea were now rushing back and forth as if egged on by a great maelstrom. The winds picked up their strength, tunneling and wrapping itself around Nomad like a veil. What is this? What have you done? Drayton cried. Nomad didn't answer, but raised a single arm up. With the raising of this limb, the wind rushed to his aid and lashed at Drayton, sending him flying backwards. Drayton used his scythe as a hook to catch himself just in time, but not soon enough to save him from the flames that were now dancing around him. Nomad exhaled, and suddenly fire burst all around Drayton. Was this even Nomad's doing? The movements felt off, different. Something else was at work in him. Something far more powerful. No! Drayton warned. I'm the strongest! I will never be weak again! Drayton launched himself at Nomad, only to be knocked back by the unyielding power of the One, blasting him back as if he were nothing. Your wickedness is at an end, the voice of Nomad spoke. But there was something about it that was not Nomad. There was an edge to it, something both warm and comforting, but powerful as the maelstrom. Drayton felt a great weight upon his shoulders, and something inside him was being forced back. Begone from my sight, Jabu! No! Drayton cried as he felt his body get thrown once more, but this time it was a feeling of strength leaving him. A feeling of weightlessness struck him as he hit the ground. He grabbed for his scythe, but now it felt so heavy in his hands. No, Jabu was gone. He was gone. Jabu! The power of Jabu is false, the One spoke through Nomad once more. He takes advantage of your mortal strength and lust for power and promises you more, but in exchange he robs you of your confidence and self-assurance, leaving you craving evermore. You will never be satisfied, never strong enough to sate your hunger for strength and fame, so you decimate all around you, friend and foe alike, to remind yourself of your greatness. As he spoke, the light began to dim, and the ground began to cease its shaking. The seas calmed and the wind relaxed its gale. Drayton stared in horror. Nomad's eyes opened once more as all became calm, and he exhaled gently, sinking to one knee in reverence to the One. It is over, he whispered. You're beaten, Drayton. No! No! I can't! Drayton cried. I'm the strongest! I have to be the strongest! If I'm not, if I can't... Drayton's world was collapsing. The strength and confidence that Jabu had granted him was gone. And now he began to realize the weight of his deeds and the consequences of them. What do I do? What happens to me now? It wasn't my fault. It was the spirit. A spirit you gave yourself to, Nomad replied. Leave this city, Drayton. Get out of here and never return. Drayton whimpered like a frightened child and climbed to his feet, abandoning the scythe and fleeing from the sight of Nomad as fast as he could run.
Nomad didn't watch him run, but simply stared ahead as if daring the city to rear its head after the devastation caused. Nomad then dropped to one knee and closed his eyes. "Thank you, my master. You saved my life once again." And now I will show you all Jay's art for Drayton, because he did indeed draw Drayton. There you go. That is Drayton. Possessed by Jabu, the spirit of pride. I'm going to let that stay up for a second. Alright, we'll take that down. And move on to the next one. We just did 5. So we are on 6. The land of Nye was a peaceful land. It was vast and filled with rolling fields and green grasses. Laying in those fields, serene and silent, was a boy. This boy had taken off his shirt and lay bareback upon the grass, enjoying the soft stroke of wind that ran over his skin and the gentle fragrance of springtime. In moments like these, he could close his eyes and forget what was going on in the rest of the world, forget the struggles and strife, the war that was being waged at this very moment. The Brannock, a race of wild barbarians, had invaded the land of Nye and were now encroaching on her territory. The boy was too young to go fight, but the same was not true of his 3 elder brothers. They had all left home to go to war, earning the praise and veneration of their father and sisters. The boy didn't share in their glee. He could only feel a mixture of shame and fear. Fear that they would not return, and shame that he was not strong like them. From the time of his birth, the boy had been frail and meek. He was not the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest, or the most clever. He was just an average lad of 12 years old. Nothing unique or outstanding to speak of. He wanted so badly to be like his brothers, who were strong and quick-witted. They were practically born to fight. With his brothers gone, it fell on the boy and his sisters to help his father run their large farm. However, the boy's sisters were both very intelligent and beautiful. They frequently did the town square quite often to sell the wares of the farm and bring in coin. When they weren't selling milk, honey, and wool, they were likely on dates or evenings out with handsome men. The boy felt resentment in this. He was not intelligent or as handsome as his sisters or brothers. He was never looked on kindly by the local girls, nor did they have any distinguishing features. He didn't know how to work a stall. He didn't know how to manage currency. He was not beautiful. He did not have the best features or hair. So what could this boy do? What was his talent? What could he offer? He didn't know. Every morning his father would wake him to begin the chores. He would go out and lead the cows to the farm and help his father milk them. He'd go to the sheep in the fields and shepherd them towards the creek for water before leading them back, all the while holding a rod in case a wolf should attack. However, it was a useless stick in the boy's hands. He knew well that should a wolf come, he'd never be able to scare it off. He would tend the animals, feed chickens, and help with housework, but he could not go fight. He could not go play. He could not go to town. Time that most boys would spend finding what they wished to do with their lives and learn their strengths was spent with this young boy working tirelessly to please his father, who was so concerned with the welfare of his older sons and daughters that it was as if the boy didn't exist at all. Though surrounded by animals and his father, the boy felt alone. "Son," his father called. The boy sat up as he saw his old man walk towards him, his balding head hidden by a straw hat that shaded his eyes. His silver beard fell a little past his chin, and he had a weary look on his face. "Father?" The boy stood up and smiled, glad that his father was there to acknowledge him. "What is it that you wish of me, sir?" We need more honey to sell tomorrow. Will you go and collect some from the hive and bring it home? The father asked. The boy's smile vanished. The hive? But father, I can't do that, he exclaimed. The hive is in the highest tree in the forest, and I'm not a climber like my older brothers. I could never... I know, his father muttered. I apologize, but they are not here, and I'm too old to make the climb myself. Please, would you... The boy looked at his father, and for a moment he felt nothing but sorrow. This was not something he wanted to ask of him. His father feared sending him to the hive to collect honey. However, there was no other choice. He was depending on him. But then it finally brought a spark of inspiration to the boy. He was depending on him. For once, the boy was needed. He couldn't show his father any hesitance. I'll get the honey, father, the boy answered. The father smiled sadly and held out his special jar for carrying the honey. The boy hesitated in taking it. This was an important jar to his father. It was crafted by two of the boy's older brothers as a gift for their father. He couldn't lose this. He had to come back with it full no matter what. I'll be back by nightfall. He took the jar that his father was holding and turned to the woods, anxious to begin his quest for honey. A meager thing, but something at least that would be worthwhile. The beehive in which the honey was located was at the very top of an old oak tree. Getting the bees to calm down was easy. A simple powder creation that the boy's brothers had made would easily pacify the bees. Getting up to the hive itself, however, was far more difficult. This boy was no climber. As he approached the massive tree, he strained his neck to look up at the hive far above him, already filling the dizzying heights he'd have to battle just to get close to it. He was slowly starting to worry that he couldn't do this. He didn't want to just abandon this task and fail his father, but he was doubting himself already. Well, let's give it a try. With a mighty lunge, he threw his body at the tree trunk and grabbed onto a branch to start hoisting himself up the tree. The first was easily within reach, but the second branch was higher, forcing him to shuffle up the tree trunk a few inches to reach it. Wrapping his fingers around it, he grimaced as he felt the rough bark dig into his skin. Ants were crawling up and down his arms, and he bit his lip as he hauled himself up further. Just a little farther now. He could do it. He reached up and stood on the lower branches to grab the next one. But just as he grabbed it, it snapped off in his hand. With a cry of fright, he fell, gravity taking hold as he fell from where he stood and hit the ground hard. Pain shot up his back and into his head, and he shouted in agony and rubbed where he'd hit. Ow, 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 he cried out, sitting up and fighting back the tears of pain and embarrassment. He looked up, and seeing where the branch was that had broken, he realized he was barely a third of the way up before he had fallen. He grimaced and hit the ground with his aching, ant-bit fist. Why am I so useless? He cried. I'm nobody. I'm just a useless no one. He started to tear up again, but not from pain. From the realization he'd let his father down. He couldn't get the honey. He couldn't shepherd sheep. He couldn't go off to war. He couldn't work a shopping cart. He could do nothing. Nothing. As he pondered on these things, there was a sound of movement not far from him. The bushes beyond him shuffled, and the boy stood up looking to them. There was something strange there. Something frightening. As he stared at it, he felt his blood run cold as a pair of great golden eyes stared out at him from the dark shadows of the bushes. Out from the darkness walked a large beast. Golden fur covered its body with a great mane like a king of beasts. Its paws stepped carefully and silently around the boy as its eyes never left him. The boy felt his whole body go rigid with fear as the great lion began to circle him curiously, gazing at him, studying him. He was going to die. The boy knew it the moment the beast took a few steps towards him. This hungry lion would surely devour him. He'd never see his father or brothers or sisters again. He backed up and felt the tree like a wall behind him, but the lion advanced further. As he tried to step aside, he suddenly saw his father's jar beside him. The lion noticed it too and began to sniff the jar. It dawned on the boy that the jar might still smell of honey. Did the lion want that? But if he gave it to the lion might break it. The gift his father had gotten from his brothers. The boy quickly picked up the jar of honey and placed it behind him, so he was between the lion and it. Eat me, the boy whimpered. Just leave the jar alone. The lion stared at him and took one more step towards the boy, its maw only a meter from him.
I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry. I can't make it home.
He raised his fist defensively, and the lion snorted a little, almost amused that this weak boy would dare fight back. What could he do against such power? The boy knew he was no different than the jar on the ground. Empty. Nothing valuable in it at all.
Peace, young man.
The boy froze at the voice and looked around, expecting to see a hunter or someone coming to scare off the lion, but there was no one. Instead, his eyes fell back on the lion, who had not moved. Had he been hearing things?
You shall not die this day.
This time the boy was sure he heard something, but again saw no one other than the lion.
Did you talk to me?
He asked, still feeling stupid for even asking.
Yes, child. You are the one I seek.
The boy nearly fell over from the shock of this lion speaking to him. A lion could talk?
You're talking. A lion is talking to me.
I am no mere lion. I am one who walks the world and witnesses its comings and goings. I was there at the beginning of life and will be there at its end. I am the shapeless, but also the shaper. I am.
A spirit, the boy gasped. He'd heard rumors and stories about spirits of the world. They were mysterious entities that had existed since time immemorial. They had amazing powers, and humans that they chose as their vessels would gain access to their powers in exchange for something of theirs.
I am this and more. I am the One.
The One? I don't know your name. I don't know any spirits.
In time, you will know me as I know your heart, child.
The lion sat back, and there seemed to be the faintest shadow of a smile on its face.
You are a stout-hearted boy. You seek to please your family and learn your place in this world. You do as you're asked and seek only to help your family and others, and would trade your life for nothing more than a sentimental jar.
Because I'm not worth as much as the jar, the boy answered sadly. I'm a nobody. I can't even climb a tree.
A jar? My child, you are more valuable than diamonds.
The lion stepped closer, and the boy took a tentative step back, still fearful.
I have chosen you, child, to be my ambassador, my shaman, as your people call it.
Just me? A shaman?
The boy cried. The shamans were ambassadors and speakers for the spirits. They were chosen by a spirit to act on their behalf and by their instruments in the world. They were incredibly powerful and respected by towns and villages. He'd met one before when visiting town with his sisters, but to be one himself... No, I can't be a shaman. I'm nobody. He frowned and hugged himself, feeling his underlying shame. My brothers and sisters are stronger and smarter than me. You should talk to one of them. I can't do anything special.
Man sees with their eyes, and the eyes can only see that which is external, the lion said. But I see through this. I see man's heart. I have seen your heart. Weak and timid you may be, but you are not useless. I do not choose you for what you are capable of, but what you could be capable of.
The lion walked by the boy and placed a gentle paw on the jar, turning it right side up and leaning down.
This jar of honey seems useless to the unintelligent or those without knowledge to see its value. But you see it as a keepsake, something precious and worth keeping safe, yes? Do you not think I see you in a similar light? Or that perhaps others do as well?
Maybe. I guess, but...
The boy grimaced and bit his lip.
It's empty. A jar that's empty isn't worth anything. Only to my family does it have any value. No one else would even care.
And why should the things you value be less important based on the view of others? Do you think that the opinions of others decreases the value of a thing?
The ugliest and most repulsive jar in the world, when cared for and loved by a single person, is more valuable to that person than all the gold in a kingdom. The lion leaned over the jar and gently breathed over it, placing a paw on it, and then looked up at the boy. You are an empty child. You are an empty jar, child. You have not yet been filled. You have value that you do not know, and in time your value will increase. Your knowledge will grow, your strength will find you, and your understanding will be limitless. But before that can happen, you must first be filled. The lion removed his paw, and to the boy's astonishment, he saw the gentle golden honey he'd been trying to get, now filled inside the jar. The lion had... No, the spirit had filled the jar. I wish to fill you, child. I want to help you understand your value and the potential you possess. The boy gazed at the lion wordlessly, unable to comprehend the power he now stood before. A real spirit was speaking to him and telling him he was its chosen ambassador, a shaman. What did the spirit see in him? What value did he really have? He had to know more. However, he began to notice the lion was harder to see in the darkening sky. The sun was setting. Oh no, it's nearly sundown. I have to get home. He turned to the lion again and fell to his knees, taking the jar and putting the lid on it again. Thank you for what you've done, and for this opportunity. Can I think it over? Return to your home, child. But come back here tomorrow, the lion answered. The boy nodded and stood up to leave. He started to run back home, but then stopped to gaze back at the lion who was turning to walk away to the forest. Spirit, what will I give you? The boy asked. I know shamans have to give something to their spirits in exchange for their blessing. What do you want from me? The lion slowed his pace and turned his head, a smile on his face. I ask nothing. Come just as you are, and you will hear me call you. All right, and I will show you the image from that chapter that Jay drew. So some of you might be noticing some biblical connections with Nomad, and there is a reason for that. Jay and I were trying to make this sort of a spiritual story that echoes a lot of biblical narratives. Like, for example, some of you pointed out in the chat that Nomad sounds a lot like David here. David was a major inspiration for Nomad. There's also Elijah. We based a lot of Elijah on Nomad, the prophet Elijah. We based a little bit of some of Jesus' miracles on Nomad, like calming the storm. Moses as well was an inspiration. We took a lot of unique inspirations. I think the biggest inspiration we took for Nomad was Elijah. I think if you were to ask me which biblical figure we took the most inspiration from, I would say Elijah. And you will see more of that as we go further, because Nomad is a wandering prophet of the One, and he performs miracles, but also defeats the false prophets and priests of various other beliefs and sin. So that was what we looked at there. But yes, we thought, and Jay and I thought it was a cool idea that the One would appear as a lion, since God is considered the lion, since Jesus is considered the Lion of Judah. And yes, for those wondering, the One is supposed to be God, supposed to be Yahweh. Give me just a second. I'm going to get a drink of water real quick. Okay. All right. On to chapter 7. Bulcha, a town on the furthest reaches of the land of Nye. It was home to the local Brannock, citizens who were integrating into Nye. It was the last place that Nomad ever wanted to go. And yet every night for the last week, his dreams had been filled with the town and its people. It was clear where the one was leading him. Despite his reservations and distaste for it, Nomad felt it was not only a day's ride from Bulcha. With each passing day, Nomad would pray and ask why he must go to a town of Brannock, the sworn enemies of the Nye. The Brannock and the Nye were mortal enemies from long ago, and the Brannock still persecute any Nye who they can strike at before retreating back behind their walls of their nation. They were a savage people, and Nomad wanted nothing to do with them. But the one did not relent, nor did he accept Nomad's pleas to relieve him of this task. He must go to Bulcha and see what was becoming of the people there.
There is a great rage in Bulcha. A great force of vengeful fury is welling up there. It must be brought to heel, the one had told him in his dreams.
Indeed, but it will also be filled with my rage when I arrive there, Nomad had reasoned. To this the one did not reply, but Nomad felt a stern disdain for Nomad's attitude. As he made his way down the road, he began to grow hungry. Nomad looked around the area but saw no trees of fruit or animals to hunt. It was a barren land. He grimaced but kept on walking, his hunger adding to his frustration.
Calm your heart, Nomad, the one seemed to whisper.
First I must calm my stomach, Nomad retorted. No sooner had he said this than Nomad paused, hearing a shouting further up the road. Walking swiftly, he made his way to the source of the sound and was surprised by what he saw. A woman was struggling helplessly against a man who was yanking on her bags, trying to rip it from her fingers.
"Give it here, woman!" the man shouted. "You don't need it anymore. You don't need it anyway. Just give it here."
No, it's ours. It's all I have.
From behind her, a small boy, no older than 10, ran up with a stick, trying to strike the assailants. The man snarled and kicked the boy over. With a scream, the woman finally let go of the bag and fell down upon the boy to aid him. Nomad grit his teeth and marched towards them, his walking staff striking the ground. As the man raised his foot to kick the woman, Nomad swung his stick, knocking the man's foot aside. Both the woman and the man looked at Nomad in disbelief. "I will not abide this sort of violence," Nomad snapped. "Sir, return that bag to the woman."
"What? You a Brannock lover now?"
Nomad's eyes widened as his eyes fell upon the woman and her child. As he looked over, he realized now that they were indeed of the Brannock people. Brannock were tan-skinned and usually rather stout in build. They were taller than the average man of Nye, and almost all had silver hair. Those who didn't usually dyed theirs a different color. This woman, though in her 30s, had long silver hair and deep blue eyes. The boy had white hair as well, but there were streaks of black in his. He might have been born of a Brannock mother and a Nye father. Such interbreeding was not uncommon this far north near Brannock lands. They must have been from the town of Bulcha.
"These savages stole my harvest last winter, and my family was starving. It's only fair I take some back."
Please, we didn't take anything from you. Leave us alone.
"Shut it, you snow-capped bat!"
Nomad acted on instinct and thrust his staff forward, striking the man in the chin and sending him rolling back. His lip curled in anger. A part of him sympathized with the man for losing his harvest to the Brannock. He'd lost more than that to them. But there was something in his heart pushing him to defend this woman. The one would not allow him to sit idle. "This is your final warning," Nomad shouted at him. "Walk away from here. Go home to your family and rebuild what you've lost, or your family will lose you as well." The man rose to his feet, and as Nomad pulled back his hood, he saw the tattoos on his shoulders and neck and realized that Nomad was a shaman. The man trembled slightly but backed off.
"Damn Brannock lover! You should just go dance in the snow with those savages and leave Nye alone!"
The man ran off furiously, leaving the bag behind. Nomad walked to it and picked up the bag in his hand. He turned and walked back to the woman, holding it out for her wordlessly.
Thank you, the woman bowed. I'm so grateful.
Nomad didn't answer her, but just looked at the boy on the ground bleeding from his side where he'd been kicked. Is he all right? Nomad asked. The woman shook her head.
We're fleeing, Bulcha. We thought if we tried to go deeper into Nye, we could find a safer place to live.
The woman answered, dropping down next to the child and treating his side. I'm sure there are Bronic sympathizers' towns all along the border. Keep going east and you might find some. Nomad turned to walk away and leave the woman to her business. Nomad! Nomad paused and clenched his fist. Master, do not ask it of me. I cannot do it. Nomad, the one repeated. You ask too much, Master. This is a Bronic. They are not your chosen. It is not for you to decide who I choose to love and who to destroy. Nomad dropped to a knee at the sternness of these words and grit his teeth. Forgive me, Nomad whispered. I meant you no disrespect. Nomad turned back to the woman and walked to her. She had seen none of what Nomad had just done, for she was too busy focusing on the boy. He approached and knelt down next to the child. He looked the boy over and then held out his arms. Give him here, he instructed.
No, I'll take him.
Will, you have a burden already to carry. Let me see the child. I will help him. Nomad snapped. Fearing the glare of his anger, the woman finally relented and helped lift the boy into Nomad's arms. He held up the boy and placed his hand upon his side where the blood was seeping. By the power of the One, let this wound be closed, and let this child find breath from the breath of life. Be healed and open your eyes. The boy groaned a moment, and Nomad felt the power of the One leave him as if flowing into the child. The wound on his side suddenly beginning to shrink and fade away as if nothing had happened at all. The life began to return to his face, and Nomad helped the child sit up as his eyes opened. The woman, his mother, gasped and cried out in glee as she threw herself upon her child and held him.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Praise whatever spirit sent you, she exclaimed.
You came from Bulcha, you said? Nomad asked, ignoring her exclamations.
Yes, but we are leaving as fast as we can. We cannot stay.
What's happening there now? Nomad asked. The woman pulled a small item up from her bag, filled it with water, and gave it to her son. But Nomad could tell she had heard him. She just feared answering. I was sent by my master to this town to save it, so I must know what waits within its walls.
A demon, she answered.
A demon? Nomad asked. The Bronic demons are different from what the Nye speak of. To the Nye, a demon is a hellish monster that stands in opposition to all that is good. But to the Bronic, demons are the result of men corrupted by evil. The Bronic believe that all life and all creation has a negative influence and a positive influence. The further you go to one or the other, the more it will alter your life, fate, and even your physical form. This is why the ugly or deformed are often cast out of Bronic society, for they are considered too corrupt or too influenced by the negative extreme. When a man walks the path of negativity, committing murders, raping, stealing, or lying, then they eventually transfigure into a demon, destructive and murderous to all around them, even their own kin. Do you know that this demon was transfigured? Who is he?
His name was Hamal, the woman answered, and he was once a soldier who fought 11 years ago in the wars between the Bronic and the Nye. When the Bronic lost, he was turned over to the Bronic government to be convicted of war crimes. We thought him to be dead, until he returned a week ago.
What changed? Nomad asked.
He now roars and howls like a wild animal. He smashes buildings like they were childish stick forts. He devours animals and even men like pork, and he rambles and raves of honor and weakness. He speaks in strange tongues, and when we tried to reason with him, he would pull a great hammer and pulverize any who approached him. None can live in Bulcha any longer, sir.
Nomad listened well to the woman's words, but something still plagued him. He'd never once seen evidence of a demon like the Bronic claimed. But there was a possible other explanation. Were there any physical changes? Nomad asked. The woman thought a moment, but then nodded.
Occasionally, we see glowing red markings on his body, tattoos like yours.
Nomad's eyes narrowed. It was as he suspected. This was no demon. It was a shaman. Hamal had achieved the blessing. and possibly possession of a spirit, an especially angry one. How ironic that a Brannock soldier would betray and massacre his own people in a fit of rage. A part of him wanted to laugh at that poetic justice, but he wouldn't. He couldn't. The one was active in his heart, and it reminded him of his duty. I'm traveling to Bulcha now, Nomad answered. I will rid your town of this demon. He stood up once more. Go down this path and head east. You will find other Brannock sympathizing towns who will show mercy to you. Do not go south, or you'll be persecuted more severely by 9 peoples. Nomad pulled his hood back over his head and began walking down the beaten path toward Bulcha. Sir, the woman cried, helping up her son to his feet and crying out to him. Nomad paused and glanced back at her. You are a Nye as well, so you must also hate the Brannock. I do not favor your people, no, Nomad answered honestly. Then I must ask, why did you save us? Why heal my son? She demanded. What game do you play with our lives? Nomad thought about this and looked down at his feet. A piece of his spirit wrenched at the question. He'd wanted to walk away. He'd wanted so greatly to ignore her and leave her and her son to their fate. But then the words of his master spoke to him again. It is not for me to decide who deserves love and protection and who does not. You are in need of help. While I confess resentment for the crimes committed by your people in the past, they are not your crimes, and I cannot hold guilt over you. He bowed slowly. Forgive my rude behavior. The woman gave the shadow of a smile that ached Nomad's soul. She ran to him, the bag she'd been struggling with in her hands. She opened it and pulled out 2 loaves of bread. She then extended them to Nomad, who gazed at them hungrily. I have nothing of value to offer you, kind sir, but all must eat. I beg you take these. You should keep them, Nomad insisted. You'll need strength for your journey. I have enough to sustain for a day or 2. Please, let me offer you my thanks. Nomad sighed and finally took the loaves from her. This will not make up for what the Brannock stole from me and my family, Nomad answered. But thank you, and forgive me again. She then bowed to Nomad and beamed. May the sun and stars always light your way, she said, signing the Brannock farewell blessing. As she turned back to her son, Nomad made his way down the path, eating of the bread given to him. Nomad. I know, master, Nomad muttered. Forgive me for my selfishness and resentment. Do not despair, child. I know the pain in your heart and memory. But know that vengeance is not yours to exact. This demon you will face is one who gave his heart to rage and resentment. Do not become him. The spirit you will soon confront will be perhaps your greatest challenge yet. You think I can defeat him, master? You cannot, the one answered. Your heart churns with uncertainty and anger. These are things this spirit thrives on. He will consume you with them. But I can defeat him. Guard your heart and soul well, Nomad. You must prepare for war. And now I will show you the picture for this chapter. Because yes, Jay did indeed do a picture for this one as well. And he said it's one of his favorites. I really like this image because you can see so much going on in it. You see Nomad rushing in to defend the mother and her son. You can see the mother and son right behind Nomad. You see the staff strike to the man's chin. It's very well done. He did such a good job with it. Gotta love Jay's art, man. Jay just does such a good job with this. But anyway, I think we'll call it there. I know that I said we'd get to go to chapter 9, but my voice is honestly starting to hurt from doing all these voices. And I think we need to call it there because it's almost 10:30, and I normally end my streams now anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and end it there, guys. Sorry. We'll pick up next time. And I really look forward to it. How have you guys felt about Nomad? Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys think about Nomad so far. Would love to know your thoughts. This was a very fun story for me to write. I put a lot of time and energy into it. And yes, I know that a lot of it is very heavy with spiritual stuff and biblical and allegory. But me and Jay really wanted to make Nomad something special. So let me know what you guys think. Next time we will talk about what Nomad confronts in Bulcha, which will be really unique. I think you'll like this face-off. We'll also see Nomad face off against a spirit who actually gives him a true challenge that he struggles with. We'll also see him meet a very special someone who will actually become very important for his future. There's a lot that's going to happen to Nomad. I think you guys are really going to like it. But yeah, this was really fun. Anyway, love this story, guys. So excited to keep reading it for you. Thank you guys so much, and as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.